From a veteran of the sport's last fight to a famous fighter's eye problem, here are 10 MMA fighters who suffered a career-ending injury in the cage.
Just about everything you need in a fight, you lose off the liver shot. It can come back.
Beautiful. Runs into the jump knee, and it's over.
Starting with Evangelista Santos. As a veteran of the sport, there's nothing that could have prepared him for what happened in what turned out to be his last fight.
Fazer este peso? No, it's not difficult for you to make this weight?
Não foi difícil para mim, foi fácil.
So I wasn't.
When he fought Michael Page in July 2016, he was hit with a hard flying knee. The impact was so bad that Santos fell to the floor and grabbed his head in pain. But what no one knew was that this would turn out to be one of the worst injuries in MMA history. It broke his skull and left a dent in his forehead where the knee had hit him. Even though he tried to return, he eventually retired. Now, sure, there are injuries and then there are accidents that end an MMA career. But this next amateur's life was changed for good by the risky move he tried during a fight in 2011, Jeff Dunbar. When the accident happened, Dunbar had only been competing for a few months, and he was going up against another newcomer, Rudy Bahena. During the fight, Bahena got on Dunbar's back and put him in a rear naked chokehold while he was standing. The hard landing broke the fighter's neck, and he was left unable to move from the neck down for the rest of his life. But amateurs aren't the only ones who get injured. You see, this next fighter had almost 30 fights under his belt when his career ended. Cody Stevens. The worst injury in MMA happened in 2018 when Mitchell's thumbs went deep into Stevens' eyes. It's a common injury, but it completely punctured his eyeball, causing most of the fluid in the eye to leak out. His career might have ended with that, but he continued to stay involved with the gym. Now, this next guy had already lost 3 fights in a row when the major injury happened. James Tahuna. It happened in 2016 in his fight against Steve Boss. Tahuna was taken to the hospital because he might have had a brain bleed. There, a scan showed that he had multiple lesions on his brain, which was even worse. He had concussions before too, but the one he got after this fight with Boss was by far the worst. After it healed, it was obvious his career was over. I mean, there's no better way to realize it's time to end your career than to be declared clinically dead while still in the cage. After all, that's exactly what happened to this next guy, CJ Hancock. When he fought Charlie Ontiveros in 2017, he was trying to end a 2-fight losing streak, but his kidneys failed. Hancock's heart stopped beating twice while he was in the cage. In fact, the paramedics used a defibrillator to try desperately to bring him back to life. Even though the medical team at the cage side did a miracle to bring him back to life that night, they still told Hancock not to fight again. Thankfully, he listened because no way could he have risked it all. Unlike this guy, who was his 3rd fight, Zach Kirk. Things went wrong only 7 seconds into the fight in 2009. Kirk was caught in a standing guillotine choke, and when he tried to get out of it by dropping to the ground, he landed on his head. The landing changed his life because it broke his neck, and pieces of bone got stuck in his spinal cord. Kirk fell to the ground and knew right away that something terrible had just happened. The heavyweight fight between these next 2 fighters at Bellator 149 in 2016 was always going to be a freak show, and it was. But it was too much for this guy, kinda like this next fighter, Dada 5000. In his fight against Kimbo Slice, both fighters used to fight with their bare hands in the backyard. Dada had lost over 40 pounds to get ready for the fight, which was hard on his body. By the second round, he was starting to have problems with his kidneys. At the time, everyone thought that he'd been hit with a knockout punch, but it turned out that he'd just had a heart attack. Dada's short-lived career was over after the fight, and the fight was changed to a no contest after Kimbo tested positive for steroids. Speaking of fighters who are fresh into MMA after fighting for other full contact sports, here's another guy who didn't last long, Igor Zinoviev. It all went down at UFC 16 in his first fight against Frank Shamrock. The fight couldn't have gone any worse for Zinoviev. The impact knocked Zinoviev out, and he was later found to have a broken collarbone and broken vertebrae in his neck. This This ended his 5-fight MMA career in a cruel way, and the rest is, well, history. Thankfully, he didn't push himself too much after that, but you know who did? Travis Lutter. In 2010, a fight between Travis Lutter and Rafael Natal in the short-lived Moosin promotion was the last fight of his UFC career. Maybe Lutter shouldn't have fought at all that night, because in his last training session before the fight, he got a stinger. Now, a stinger is when nerves in the neck get pinched and send a shock-like feeling down the arm. Even though it was the worst thing Lutter had ever been through, he still fought. And the next night, he paid for it. But it was too late to go back. And at the end of the first round of the fight, Natal punched Lutter so hard that he fell to the ground. He threw him to the ground and hit him again, ending the fight with a knockout. And back then, it didn't seem like an unusual knockout at the time, to be honest. But he said several years later that his neck just never felt right after that fight. That would mean that Lutter would have to have major surgery to fuse his neck at 3 different points. In fact, doctors found that he'd broken a vertebrae earlier in his career, which hadn't really been diagnosed at the time. Lutter waited 2 years in hopes that the damage would heal, but by then he was 39 and still had neck pain. So he decided to give up boxing for good. Now, of course, when we're talking about career-ending injuries, we can't possibly forget the guy who's made headlines all over, Michael Bisping.
He postponed the fight for a bit.
He did.
And you speculated publicly that there might be reasons why he postponed the fight.
Eye problems have put Michael Bisping's career as a fighter in danger more than once over the years. He was once the UFC middleweight champion. Back in 2013, when Vitor Belfort knocked him out with a head kick, the retina in his right eye came loose. It was a serious injury that could have ended his career. But Bisping wasn't ready to give up yet, so he kept fighting without getting help and risked losing his sight.
Look at this, baby boys. You know what I mean? You know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying? That's why I used to wear sunglasses.
He then fought Alan Belcher, but while he was training for his next fight with Mark Munoz, his eye got so bad that he couldn't see his hand in front of his face. In fact, he had to have surgery to fix it. Later, though, his retina detached again, and scar tissue meant that a piece of his retina had to be cut out during the next surgery. Bisping still had trouble with his vision, but amazingly, he was able to fight again and even won the 185-pound belt, even though his eye was permanently damaged. Finally, after Kelvin Gastelum knocked him out in 2017, Bisping started having strange problems with his other eye. Doctors told him he had a vitreous detachment, which could lead to a detached retina. So after weighing his options, Bisping decided he couldn't risk losing his sight in both eyes any longer and announced his decision to retire. Guess that's lesson enough that you should always put your health first. And with that, that's all for MMA fighters who suffered a career-ending injury in the cage.